Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Hearts of Iron 4 dev diary. This week we're going to be covering nationalist China, including the Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek, the warlords, and even a little bit on Puyi in Manchuria. Unlike previous weeks, this isn't actually the longest dev diary, so there's not going to be too much detail, and it's covering both historical and ahistorical. So, to keep up good pace, let's head straight into this week's dev diary. Our opening introduction to China begins with this lovely image of the presidential palace in Nanjing. I feel I've said it before, but I am still taken aback by the quality of these levels in a game from back in 2016, which really didn't have any focus on making models beyond units, ships, tanks, that sort of thing. It is of course funny looking at the size differential between the 100x building compared to the miniature houses below it. Overall, the arch has got a pretty good level of accuracy. If you really look in, you can see individual detailing just above each of the archways, and again, I don't know when you'd ever zoom in close enough to see it. For those who are wondering, the presidential palace will of course be in the capital of Nanjing, where Nationalist China was holding their government. Next up, we get a little bit of context as to the starting situation of the Republic of China. For many decades now, China has been split from the old Qing dynasty into a series of warlords, and one of those kind of remnant states is the Republic of China. To add to that, there has also been an ongoing civil war between the Communist Chinese and the Nationalist Chinese. From the starting point in 1936, they've managed to secure a relative period of peace and stability known as the Nanjing Decade, where they've been able to build up some of their industry. Of course, with the looming threat of the Japanese and their previous provocations in 1931 during the Mukden incident, this peace is probably not going to last. And as such, when trying to portray the Republic of China, the goal is actually to portray the central government of the Kuomintang, being, as the dev diary describes, the only fully legal government in this time period. It will be your job to try and unify what remains of China in one way or another to hold off against the Japanese, put an end to the civil war, and try and get China back on track. So before we go in and take a look at the individual branches, I thought it would be good to get a nice overview of the entire focus tree right now at the start. The core is on the left, which is the political branch, which seems to be divided into 4 sections. On the left, we have a democratic alternative history branch. In the middle left, we have an oppositionary alternative history branch. On the middle right, we've got the historical Chiang Kai-shek branch, and on the far right, we've got the blue sun, blue shirts, very much so nationalist alt history path. Then on the alternative side of the focus tree, we've got the very traditional industrial branch, army branch, air force branch, and navy branch. So really, in totality, not the largest focus tree in the world. Again, kind of similar to what we saw with the Communist Chinese. I suppose in some ways that could be a testament to how quickly China finds itself in the action. They don't have as long of a build-up period to really take advantage of all these focuses. Let us begin then by taking a look at the historical branch with Chiang Kai-shek. Now I must tell you that unlike previous weeks, there is not a lot of detail, so it's kind of me going to be inferring things from the image of the focus tree branch, but I'm sure we can do okay. For those wanting to play down the historical path, you'll end up looking at something like this. By going down and denouncing feudalism, you're on the path to Chiang Kai-shek's China. It seems to me that it's divided up into, maybe 2 key ideas. On the left, we have the idea of making one nation undivided. That's going to be unifying all of China, as Chiang Kai-shek historically tried to do inside the Chinese United Front using the reworked faction mechanic. On the right, we've got a sub-branch called Demonstrate Our Resolve, which to me looks like the representation of Chiang Kai-shek trying to be a global diplomat, going around the world, trying to find as much resources as he can, including sending the First Lady abroad to try and get some tanks, trucks, planes, anything. Towards the bottom of the tree, it seems the focuses are more so about trying to consolidate your faction into one China and getting any of the missing pieces. On the left, I can see a focus called request handover of the coastal cities, so getting back Hong Kong, Macau, of course, and then on the right, we see a generalissimo for all of China, with a focus called the international community. I suppose if the Chinese United Front's final aim is to unify all of China into nationalist China, then there wouldn't be a faction anymore. And so at that point, I guess you could delete the faction and just go join the Allies. Or alternatively, subjugate Korea, I guess. That's the other thing you could do. Luckily, the dev diary doesn't keep all its secrets from us, and we do get to learn a little bit about how it's going to work. So as we can see in this image, the Chinese United Front is able to sort of consolidate its members into becoming puppets using a decision system. Of course, you won't just be spending political power to do this. With the faction rework, factions have influence within them depending on how much they've contributed to the faction. And as such, if you want to press the Northeast and Shaanxi army to become your subjects, you're going to need 15% influence. Of course, we don't really know how easy it is to farm influence, we don't know the timeline, so this is kind of an abstract concept, but in total, it seems that it won't just be as simple as getting like 8 newspaper notifications that all the nations have joined your faction. You're going to have to slowly build it up, make them puppets, and consolidate. We do get to see one of the focuses, talking about inspecting the troops that, while giving you some army experience gain, gives you 10% war score influence gain, meaning that if you're sticking your units along the line against the Japanese, or maybe you can also attack some of the warlords really early into the game, you can use it to farm more influence within your faction by contributing war score to then use that influence to get more faction members in. Additionally, we see the other side that I mentioned to Chiang Kai-shek, his work going around the world and trying to get as much support from foreign powers as possible. In this case, we see an example where the Soviet Union agrees to help, giving you production cost reduction on guns and artillery, by far like the most important stuff you'd want to build. 15% production cost is really quite good as well. Or alternatively, the United States can agree to help you, giving you 300 economic surplus each month, which you can use to build things up. It should be noted that these are pretty strong, but since you're always on the back foot, it's going to be quite necessary to hold out against a newly updated Japan. And with that, we've reached the end of the historical branch. I did say they were pretty short. From the offset, I didn't see anything too dramatic. I didn't see anything falling into the world of a crazy old history scenario. It looked relatively sensible. Even the end of the tree didn't have some world conquest level focuses. So if you were looking for a more historical experience, maybe they've done that with Chiang Kai-shek. Moving on then to Wang Jingwei, the opposition, and most certainly Chiang Kai-shek's greatest adversary in this period. If Chiang Kai-shek can be seen as a generalissimo, using his army to build pressure on neighbouring warlords to consolidate China, then you can take Wang to be the politician trying to use the politicking inside the government to unify China. As such, after you've prepared for the change in leadership, you want to lay down the foundations for a unified China and spend a lot of your time trying to reorganize the Republic of China into, I guess, an actual working republic, particularly by focusing on the Yuan system, the examination Yuan, the executive Yuan, impair the control Yuan, lots of focusing on the government. Additionally, by being a politician instead of a generalissimo, you have a specifically interesting option up here to avoid another crisis with the Japanese. Not necessarily stopping it outright, perhaps, but certainly buying you some time. And then at the bottom, it does again seem to involve unifying all of China, as one could imagine all of the paths to do, but then focuses to liberate the peoples of Asia, bring the revolution further, and end the humiliation with a crosshair over Europe. I can't speak to Wang Jingwei's maybe world conquest goals, but if it's about liberating the peoples of Asia, maybe this is going to be a series of liberation casus bellis? I suppose let's go take a look. So the first piece of information we get about this branch is indeed confirmation about the ability to try and delay the Japanese. With another crisis in the making since the Mukden incident, you can try and offer docking rights and airbase access just for a little bit more time of the looming crisis. Additionally, we see the option to give resource rights in Anhui for time, giving you 60 days. I'm not sure how many resources are in that state, nor am I sure about how much benefit 60 days is going to get you, but if you take the opinion that holding out against the Japanese is basically waiting until they do Pearl Harbor and then America comes and saves you, then delaying as long as possible might be a positive. Towards the bottom of the tree, we actually get to see what the focus Liberate the Peoples of Asia does. And yep, it does indeed give you a Liberate war goal against the United Kingdom, as well as war goals against basically anybody who owns colonial states in Asia. Then at the bottom, you unlock a decision to set up puppet governments in those states, which is probably going to be useful if you're, for example, invading, I don't know, Malaysia or India, and you don't necessarily want the garrison because it's going to be really expensive. So instead you can use the decisions to set up puppet governments, and then you save some of your manpower. That's probably how I imagine using this. And with that, that's all we really learn about the opposition branch. Again, they're keeping a lot under the collar here, not too much to figure out. No idea what all of these focuses are actually going to deliver in terms of gameplay, but I guess we'll find out later. Next up, we've got the blue shirts, which I guess you can imagine as being the equivalent of the brown shirts or the black shirts, but with an Asian twist. This is the most radical paramilitary group inside the KMT, and as a result, they're probably going to be taking a much more fash stance on how to deal with both the Japanese and their surrounding enemies. The dev diary states that when building this tree, they wanted an experience that made it feel like every single border is going to be a front line in waiting, enemies in all directions, perhaps for a more, I don't know, a player that's seeking a more difficult challenge. As it appears to me, it seems to be split into basically one predominant branch, with a little bit on the left about improving the blue shirt soldiers, but the core is going to be about aggressive expansion, securing the northern front, unifying the party, expelling the out-occupiers, just ultimately going after the Chinese Soviet Republic pretty close to the top of the tree. Because of that then, one might not be surprised to see the end of the tree continue some aggressive expansion with the Eternal Revolution, a new Middle Kingdom, and the Cradle of Civilization. Goodness, it seems so aggressive. It kind of feels like you're playing the German Reich, but from, I don't know, in China or something, which would be pretty cool, to be fair. You know, if you're massively expanding really rapidly, constant conflict into conflict into conflict. The dev diary talks about how you will want to reform the blue shirts to make them the true authority inside the Republic of China's government, and by setting up local chapters in different states, you can try and secure their presence, but also get buffs towards non-combat out of supply penalties and max entrenchment, which is basically the main thing you need for holding out a defensive line against the Japanese. Unfortunately, the devs are really stingy on telling us anything else about this path, so we just have to infer it from this final line. By successfully conquering claimed areas, you will be rewarded with more efficient resource extraction and, more importantly, the ability to integrate the states into your glorious empire, proving yet again the world revolves around you. If that is the case, then can one imagine that after taking a new Middle Kingdom and going after the Northern Mandate in Russia, the greater game going against what? The Middle East, Iran, Afghanistan, India, perhaps? And then the Southern Mandate, of course, going after Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand? Can we core everything here too? Because I suppose if you're going to have a really difficult path, you also want really interesting rewards. Very interesting to see how this path actually turns out. And our final path is the Chinese Democratic League. The Democratic path, of course. The dev diary describes how the largest opposition force within the KMT, not an individual like Wang, but the largest group opposition force, would have been the Chinese Democratic League. As such, trying to bring them to power isn't just going to be about ousting Chiang Kai-shek, but completely reforming the entire Republic of China into a different political entity entirely. Looking inside the focus tree, it seems that the top row of focuses are going to be about changing up the leadership, inviting Carson Chang, glorifying previous leaders, civil protection of civil rights, definitely changing the status quo so that you can unify the China Democratic League. Then below that, we have 3 smaller branches. The one on the left feels something akin to Chiang Kai-shek going out and trying to ask for aid. Note the German mission doesn't use the Reich flag, but the democratic flag. So I wonder if this is an alt history only focus. On the right, we've got an economic branch to kind of, let's say, reform the economic principles of how China is being managed to something more democratic. And then straight down the middle, we've got the main line of how you are going to try and deal with the disparaged warlord situation. I do note that one of the focuses down here is called Invite the Free, just above Spreading the Light of Freedom, which sounds to me like you're trying to build up a faction, maybe akin to the Allies, considering that you're a democratic nation. After that, we have 2 additional minor things to talk about. So on the right, this path also has access to avoiding another crisis with Japan. So if you want to trade off some resource rights to buy you more time, you might want to do it, especially considering you're spending all your time becoming democratic. And then on the left, we've got something very odd, a series of floating focuses, just kind of hanging out on the side. I quite literally reached out to Paradox to ask if this was intentional, and I didn't hear anything back. So I am going to operate that this is intentional. It is supposed to look like this. It's just very strange. I mean, Scout for Air experts seems to be relevant to going down these paths, but it has no adjoining branch above it. It's just here. It gets even weirder when you come back over here into the historical Chiang Kai-shek branch. Underneath Send the First Lady, there's a focus called The Hump, right? I think this is to go ask for planes, specifically. And you look in this corner, there's a focus called The Hump. I genuinely have no clue. I want to say this is a mistake, but I have no clue. So what do you think? Intentional? Not intentional? Weird? Who's to say? Okay, let's get back on track talking about the democratic alternative for the Republic of China. The first thing you'll want to do, considering you're not keeping Chiang Kai-shek around, is pick a new president for the Republic. Here we can see 4 different options to go with, but my heart will reside with Carson Chang, because his portrait simply looks like he mugs everyone. Additionally, it's worth remembering that the Republic of China, while a republic, does start off non-aligned, and so you will be doing things like spending political power to try and boost up your democracy support and make the country democratic. After that, the last thing we find out about the focus tree comes in the final 2 lines at the bottom of the section. So the way you're going to have to deal with the Japanese seems to be about rallying the expats from who have left China, presumably to go to more democratic countries, and ask them to return to come help you fight off against the Japanese. However, that won't be the only help you're going to get, because if you're able to hold out long enough, you will be able to request to join the Americans in their faction, bringing them in to the war earlier than they did historically, which is pretty huge. For those who might have forgotten, America going forward has its own faction separate from the Allies. So if you're Germany and you wanted to Operation Sea Lion, then you can just go in and possibly capitulate the Allies straight up. Or in this case, if you're China, you can try and join the American faction and then call them in to come save you. Because of that, standing together against aggression will open up the possibility to bring liberty throughout Asia and Oceania, effectively making an alternative to the Allies. So if the Allies is the Atlantic Treaty, as I guess it kind of becomes NATO, then in this alt history, you're trying to create a Pacific Treaty. And with that, we have covered all 4 of the political branches. So, what do you think? Ultimately, I think that the historical felt relatively historical. The opposition gave you something different to do. I have my questions about the democratic path, and the blue shirt path looks interesting if it really is as aggressive as they're making it out to be. Okay, with that covered, let's go take a look at the 4 other branches. starting with the industrial branch, a Nanjing century. As one might expect with most countries in Hoi 4, you start off with some pretty negative debuffs. The economy law cannot be changed, construction speed down, minus 25% consumer goods. That's quite a lot of corruption, but maybe worse is inefficient economy, production efficiency growth, which is pretty important when you consider that China needs to be making as many guns as possible. So if you were wanting to upgrade your infantry equipment from, let's say, 1 to 2, well, your ability to regain your daily production amount is going to be much slower and might actually create a negative backlog of guns you need to create just through inefficient economy. Basically, you have to start with terrible infantry equipment and you have to stay with terrible infantry equipment. When designing the industry tree, it seems like they're trying to display the differences between how Communist China is focusing on rallying the more rural communities, while the Republic of China has focused more on the urban communities. And it will be up to you to decide if you want to continue that or take a different spin. So we've got some focuses on trying to fix the national spirits. Moving down the centre, we're trying to build up our industry, and specifically our resources, steel, tungsten, the new one of coal. And then on the right, we've kind of got that decision between dealing with the urban and rural areas, such as sending the urban students to the countryside. I wonder if in doing so, you get some debuffs, but it kind of reduces the power of the communist Chinese if they wanted to attack you. This all culminates in the bottom with constructing the Benkao Dam and a university, of course a research slot. For those who might have forgotten, this is the Chinese Soviet Republic focus tree, and this is their industrial branch, and it does have some similarities, including the agricultural reform appears to be taking advantage of those rural areas, but also constructing the exact same dam. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it won't be possible to build the same dam twice, but it is kind of funny that they both have the same goal and desire to build this thing. I wonder if there is some play where you kind of want your opponent to take this focus so it saves you having to take it yourself. Next up, we have the National Revolutionary Army, and it's just about as terrible as you can imagine. Debuffs all across the board, but just some things I really want to point out. Defense, entrenchment and supply are in the toilet. Brilliant, fantastic for a defensive nation. And recruitable population factor, minus 78%. It appears like they've gone for the India national spirit, where you basically have no manpower to take advantage of. The focus tree itself seems to be split into two major sections with a little bit in the middle. On the left, protracted warfare feels much more of a defensive tree. We've got building forts, defense in depth, bogging them down in the centre. And then on the right, we've got decisive battles. This is of course your offense doctrine, when you're trying to turn the odds against them. We've even got motorized for pushing them, maybe going for some encirclements. And in the centre, just a little bit about dealing with supply, building up logistics, and straight up the Combined Logistics Command. Surprisingly, we do get to know a little bit about some of the content within the focus tree. So if you're going for coordinate defense, you're going to have to go around trying to build up specific states to give them bonuses for defense in this case. Or alternatively, if you want to go the way of decisive battles, you can use the same concept but flipped in the other direction. So you can declare individual war zones where you are basically saying, this is the place I want to do my breakthrough, giving you infantry attack, artillery attack, and initiative. As a final note, they mentioned that while the branches are not mutually exclusive, you will have to pick one branch to focus on before you're able to go back and do the other branch, which is the kind of thing we saw being introduced in Gotterdammerung with Germany, for example. So you focus on doing maybe the defense side, and then once you've ensured you've held out against the Japanese for long enough, you can flip it and then start doing your offense branch. Okay, I hope you can forgive me if I fly through the next two branches. Ultimately, I don't have too much to comment on because, well, they are what you would expect from an air branch, getting bonuses towards building planes and trying to fix national spirits. Nothing in here that's too cray-cray, although I do note there is the ability to maybe start building helicopters which is an interesting way to place your direction, and building up some paratrooper forces, which is useful if you wanted to maybe try and land in Japan yourself. And then also we have the Republic of China's Navy. Taking a quick look, one can imagine there to be focuses about asking other countries to give you their ships, because you don't really have the base to focus on building your own. In many ways, I could imagine the real goal is to just deny the enemy having consistent naval supremacy by just heading out, sinking some ships with some subs, and then coming back into harbour. But even then, you're really going to struggle to try and hold off against the Japanese. And with that, we get a look at 2 final admirals that you maybe will end up going for, and the focus tree, because that is the end of all we learn about the Republic of China. Ultimately, I can't say I'm too disappointed. I guess I'm a little surprised that, again, similar to Communist China, it feels like it drops down pretty short, but maybe the position is that considering it's so quick to get into the conflict, they don't need to have a massive long focus tree that you won't be able to get to the bottom of. And I'm still extremely confused about those floating focuses on the top left. That cannot be right. Now, we do get to learn a little bit more. Because the dev diary isn't over yet, we get to see the reworked Warlord tree and Manchuria tree. Let's start off by looking at the reworked Warlord tree, and on initial reaction, they really meant it when they said it's just a light rework. This section looks basically identical. The main change seems to be on the cooperate with the nationalist side, where there is this split down the middle, where you're either joining the government or trying to battle it out for China. The industry tree has had an ever so slight rework, but really looks very similar. And then, and this is the cool part, each of the warlords individual have had their own unique sub-branch added onto the side. So in this case, we are looking at, it's going to be one of the Zaiba Sanma nations, which means you will have specific goals relative to that warlord. In the case of this one, your goal is going to be uniting the other 3 Ma's to create one big Zaibai Sanma, and then building up the Ma army. I don't know why, but I have a memory of me once suggesting doing exactly this. Maybe some of you remember, did I not in the dev diary say, I really hope they do exactly this? Give a little sub-branch, akin to what they did in Congo, where depending on which monarch you go down, in Congo, you got a little sub-branch depending on that monarchy, and this feels very similar with the warlords. Moving on, we get to see 3 more of those individual unique branches. So, in the case of the Ma, you could also sideline your family conflicts, try to demand submission, and then create a united Ma state. I guess a much shorter version. If you're playing in the Sichuan clique, you actually get 3 separate lines to go down, maybe a much more contested area. And finally on the right, you have to call for aid, strike the governor, and make the Xinjiang Ma clique. That could be interesting if you're trying to unite Xinjiang and Zaibai Sanma into one larger nation. That could really put a spanner in the works for the East. Overall, I'm really happy they did this. I know that the warlords aren't necessarily the most interesting nations in the world, but it doesn't mean that they don't have to be interesting in any capacity. Giving each of them just a sprinkle of individual flavour, I think is such a good direction for making, okay, which warlord could I play today? What has an interesting story to pursue? And how could I take advantage of it? And for our final image of the dev diary, which looks very weird with this shading, we see the reworked Manchukuo Qing China Puyi tree. On the right, we now see the archaic invite foreign investors branch, which seems to have been completely abandoned by every other country except for Manchukuo. And then on the left, we see what starts as very familiar, but quickly devolves into new content. So it seems that the going with the Japanese side, or siding with the Japanese, you get more focuses along the line to pursuing becoming the mandate of China on behalf of Japan. But perhaps even more interesting, if you go with the assertiveness branch, working your way to becoming independent, not only has the imperial destiny focus been expanded with more focuses to do at the bottom, there is quite literally an alternative history branch now, where if you push to the right, you can depose Puyi and choose between going with making the Republic of China or making communist China. This is very peculiar. This feels like it's its own whole country expansion locked in this entire section. If I was to guess, I would imagine that if you're going to depose Puyi, then the left branch would maybe be about joining the Chinese faction with Chiang Kai-shek and trying to become the legitimate government inside of that system. And then the system on the right is going to be about becoming a puppet of the Soviet Union instead of the Chinese, and then using that to push into China. Oh, and I might have missed, it also looks like there is a little middle branch which could be about becoming a constitutional monarch as opposed to an absolute divine emperor. So yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff to explore in here. I'm pretty happy overall. But with that, I think I've spent enough time talking about this dev diary. It was supposed to be short. The final thing we see there is a new image for a potential country leader of Mongolia. I doubt that means any Mongolia content, but maybe something you can change. So tell me, how do you feel about the new rework? We got to see China, we got to see the warlords, and we got to see some of Puyi. Of course, we don't know what many of the focuses do, but it is interesting all the same. Personally, I'm excited to take a look at the warlords once the game actually releases and find out if there are any really crazy warlord paths. It would be really interesting if they made one of the warlords like, I don't know, a hidden releasable. You release them, and then inside that branch, there is a become emperor branch. That's really what I was hoping for. Somebody to take the Sekai path and try and proclaim themselves as a new emperor. Goodness, that could have been so interesting. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see. With that, I'll say thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this informative, interesting, likable. Please tell me what you think about the New Republic of China, and if you liked this video, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Okay, but seriously, is there gonna be a Long Yun Emperor path? Is there? Maybe? Bye.